let us hop into this, shall we? What's up, guys? I'm Greg Alba.
I'm John Humphrey.
Hi, I'm PJ Campbell. I'm new here. Thanks, guys.
PJ Campbell's voice.
And
I have a voice. I do. I have a
Face.
voice and a face
torso, arms.
and a podcast voice, Greg.
Podcast
Didn't
voice.
we talk about that once?
Yes. He has the podcast voice.
I do.
So this is a video podcast we're doing right now. I was on PJ Campbell's podcast recently, and I saw this guy's video collection. We're going to talk about a lot of Bond-related stuff. And I was like, I need to find someone to bring on here who knows a lot about Bond. And he was the only person I texted, and he just so happens to be a big Bond fan. So
Yeah, I don't know.
like, perfect. I lucked out. Yeah.
Felt really unfortunate. I got this text message, and he's like, hey, can you come over and talk Bond? Man, I don't like hanging out with you that much, but if you need it, I'll come over.
I appreciate that, PJ.
Great.
Guys, I met PJ through, John and I both did, through the Schmodown. And what do you do there again?
I help behind the scenes. I shoot some of the behind the scenes stuff. I've helped write questions. I met these idiots there. John, you're such a lovely person. How do you hang out with him so often?
Oh, I take a lot of drugs in the morning to get past the initial, Greg barrier, and then the rest of the day I'm in sort of a weirdly lucid dream state.
That feels fair.
Prophet is never appreciated in his own land, people. We're going to talk about some fun things here. One of our top reward tiers at Patreon is whatever video you request, we must put up on the YouTubes. And we like doing live streams and podcast stuff now. And today comes from Mikael Linden, handsome man from Sweden. And basically, we've never had a third person on for a podcast. This is kind of strange.
Man, so I'm the first.
You're the first.
We're about to discover how hard it is to stick to a time limit.
Yes.
Especially with the three of us. That's going to be almost impossible.
this is
I'm
good.
taking status 3.
I haven't even got to what the main topic of the video is. We're 2 minutes into this thing.
Are we recording yet? Can we swear on this?
Hey, am I supposed to have a podcast voice?
No, man.
Great,
Well, do whatever voice you want. Hey, this is PJ Campbell. It's usually the podcast voice.
Hey,
What's up, guys? I'm bringing energy to the room right
It's
now.
either that or something very breathy while we discuss history or
It's
something.
usually the
and,
supporting character.
Murders.
That's fair.
Okay, so he basically wanted us to talk about. I have a message right here that pretty much laid it out in a real simple term that I just did not pull up properly. But kind of just comparing the Mission Impossible franchise to the Bond franchise. And our thoughts on both, kind of going back and forth, which one we prefer. He had a couple of specific topics in regards to it that I do want to cover. He was pretty much talking about does Bond fit into today's society? What will happen to Mission Impossible after Tom's departure? Anyway, I'll lead the charge here on asking first. I think I know John's answer. You probably prefer the Mission Impossible franchise.
Nowadays.
Yes.
When I was a kid, I was all about Bond.
PJ?
So it's kind of a tough question because the Bond franchise as a whole is many different franchises kind of rolled together. Currently, Mission Impossible as a franchise has 6 really great films for the most part outside of Mission Impossible 2.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I think it's almost the better franchise because longevity-wise, I think it's almost had better movies overall.
It's better concentrated.
Yeah. Whereas Bond, over time, we have 24 official Bond films. And some of them are really great, and some of them are really awful. And we've really only had one fairly awful Mission Impossible movie versus the 5 really great ones.
You see, I'm not as well versed in the Bond franchise as I would like to have been, which is why you're here.
Oh, great.
Because I've seen a handful of the Sean Connery ones. I've seen maybe a couple of the Roger Moore ones. And I've seen all the Pierce Brosnan and all the Daniel Craig ones. And the thing is, Mission Impossible, that franchise actually gets my heart pumping sometimes.
Definitely.
Whereas the Bond films, other than a couple of them,
Yeah.
Casino Royale is the only one that Skyfall was really cool the first time I saw it.
It is not aged as well as
But then you rewatch it, you're like, yeah, it's a good Bond movie. you know? Casino Royale is the standout to me out of them all. And to me, I think, because kicking off with this Bond fit into today's society, I don't think he quite does, which is a big reason why Spectre seemed to be fucking weird when they were. I remember being in the theaters and a lot of people laughing very uncomfortably when he was about to bone Monica Bellucci.
Oh yeah.
Oh, after her husband just died or whatever.
yeah.
Well, the biggest problem with Spectre overall, and I think you might be right in a way, is that Bond as a character now in what we saw in like the Connery and Roger Moore ones, he really doesn't quite fit. That's why Casino Royale works so well, because Royale is a fresh take on a character, and it didn't fit the confines of what the series had been. So for me, I think that's the biggest difference.
Well, and I feel like the first fresh take is always the most special in a contained franchise like this, because the problem that Casino Royale presents is, okay, now how do we give everybody that rush again, coming back to this same tone? You know, even though it is a new tone, they're gonna get used to it again. You know,
it's like I'm aware that Bond came before Mission Impossible, and that because I did a movie fights episode where Mark and Draco and I were going back and forth on like who's better, Ethan Hunt or James Bond, and yeah, I agree that like, because James Bond is more of an archetype and less of a full-fledged character. Like before we started filming, PJ was saying how he thinks that Daniel Craig was the first time he got to be a full three-dimensional character, which I agree with. But still to a lesser extent than what Ethan Hunt has become. So the Bond franchise has that benefit of you can kind of just keep this franchise going because of its lack of depth.
Yeah,
which is kind of weird. Because of that lack of depth, you can keep this going forever as it's proven to go. But because of that, and I'm a guy who tends to go off of more than just thought, I go off of how something moves my heart, and Mission Impossible is the one that connects with me on an emotional level, starting from part 3.
And I think the thing that helps with Mission Impossible, especially for the three of us, is it has been kind of the gold standard of action franchises for us growing up. Like, it's been in our lives since we were young. Don't get me wrong, we had Bond also, but Ethan Hunt has always been, like, the hero for us. And as we've gotten older, Ethan has gotten older, so we've stayed with him, and it's always been Tom Cruise, and I think that's why we are still so attached to it. Bond, again, has changed so many times. There's been so many actors involved. You don't get that same attachment, especially because he never really grew as a character.
He never grew as a character, yeah.
Well, and there's something that's interesting to me about the franchises versus one another, because I think Mission Impossible also forced Bond into a weird position, because Bond movies have action, but once you grow up and stop being 10 to 14 years old, you start to realize, like, oh, the point of these movies is not necessarily gadgets and action. It's just that those are elements that come along with the espionage and the mystery and all the different characters and stuff like that. And so I feel like now there is an added pressure for Bond movies to be a lot like a Mission Impossible
to have some
movie.
gravitas.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's just, a weird identity crisis for them, because, part of it is it's episodic, and it's kind of like a TV show where at the end of every episode we just reset. And I almost feel like Bond could have more longevity in the now if we go back to embracing the fact that he doesn't at least need to be on serialized journeys, because each Bond, is adapted or was adapted from a novel, and I gotta imagine each time you would check in with him, it's just a different moment in his life. They don't have to be connected necessarily, and I feel like that is a way in which Bond could push away from being in Mission Impossible's shadow, because those are so very connected.
Weirdly, I think that, what influenced the Daniel Craig ones was actually the Bourne films more than the Mission Impossible films.
Because
it especially shows in Quantum of Solace.
And I feel like the Mission Impossible films now were actually kind of going off of what Casino Royale had done.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the funny thing.
It's a weird mishmash of influencing one another.
Right, because when Mission Impossible 3 came out, they were convinced it wasn't even going to do that well, because that was right after Tom Cruise jumped on the couch.
Yeah, and it was the lowest performing. That's when he lost his contract to Paramount.
Yeah, and then Ghost Protocol, they were trying very, very hard to get rid of him.
Yeah,
and that was supposed to be Jeremy Renner.
Yeah.
But between what Casino Royale did, leading to Quantum, leading to Skyfall, Mission Impossible did the same thing, where the serialized storytelling started to become important, and Ethan started to grow as a character. And I think that in the long run, it's worked much better for Mission Impossible.
See, like as more of a contained franchise, Mission Impossible, I think is stronger. But the thing is, I really have a hard time seeing it continuing once Tom Cruise is gone. Which is kind of sad, because there was the show, which was an ensemble piece, and then I remember the movie upset a lot of people, the first one, because you wiped out the ensemble and you made it the Tom Cruise show. But then the Tom Cruise show really became awesome around part 3, because 1 and 2, I like 1, I really appreciate 1, I really don't like part 2 at all. Part 3 that is my personal favorite. That's when I fell in love with not just Ethan Hunt, but with Tom Cruise. Was that movie specifically?
And J.J. Abrams is the director.
And J.J. Abrams and Tom Cruise specifically sought him out for that. That's when it really became something special, that franchise, to me, because every time I watch that one, gets my heart pumping, you know? Like, when he's running at the end, you're like, fucking run, man!
Well, and
you know?
Philip Seymour Hoffman is
As
the
the
villain.
villain,
Oh
yeah.
my god, he's so good.
Yeah.
That opening is incredible.
But a big part of the franchise that has, because part 3 doesn't really offer this, but once you get to Ghost Protocol and the other ones, and I imagine for the next 2 that they have going, a big part of the selling gimmick of the Mission Impossible franchise is, what is the next crazy stunt Tom Cruise is going to do? If the movies were only that, I probably wouldn't love them. Because I feel like that's a weak argument that people make against it. They're like, oh, all that people care about is the stunt Tom Cruise is going to do. I'm like, no, that's not true. Otherwise, they would just wait for it to go on YouTube and you'd watch it. Because the movies are so much more than those Tom Cruise stunts. But those are such a big factor in those movies. Entertained, because beyond him jumping off of shit, it's also the motorcycle chase sequences. You know, these really drawn out sequences of action. And if you eliminate Tom Cruise from that and you put in a stunt double or someone who just doesn't have that level of energy, I imagine you can't just replace Ethan Hunt. I weirdly, and I think the thing to help save Bond, because I don't think the Bond archetype works anymore, of sexist, misogynistic, alcoholic, you know.
Yeah.
But he's got all these like terrible qualities, and also I just don't think he's a good spy. I really don't. He blows shit up all the time.
That's actually kind of the point, though. That was in Casino Royale. He was supposed to be a blunt instrument, which
Yeah.
is understandable. He was never supposed to be a great spy. He was kind of terrible at what he did. But
Yeah.
the problem is that he always got the job done in the end, which is the problem that M has always had.
Yeah.
Bond is always the loose cannon. Basically, he's Martin Riggs if Martin Riggs was MI6.
Yeah, he's a terrible. He's got, because he doesn't grow as a character. See, Martin Riggs at least got to grow in those 4
that's
movies,
true.
you know. But Bond doesn't get to grow, and because of that, I think what we saw in Spectre had a lot of off-putting things. Like when I go back and watch those Sean Connery movies, it's a little uncomfortable to see just how he treats. And this isn't me just making some like, oh, Greg's trying to hop on the feminist act, you know, social justice warrior. It's just facts at this point. It's fucking bizarre when you're...
Times have changed a lot.
A whole lot of facts.
No?
Yeah, and that was one of the main awkward things about the most recent Bond film was they tried to kind of split the difference and bring back some of that old, like, fun, suave stuff that isn't suave anymore. And I feel like that, if you're talking about Bond for the now, my take would be use that then and actually confront it rather than just trying to kind of put it in or out of the character, you know?
Because that's what Casino Royale sets up, and everything after Casino has not followed through with what they set up.
Yeah.
Even Spectre, we watched, we saw a video, John and I, of top 10 movies where characters don't have an arc, and they brought up Skyfall. And I'm like, that's so true. Skyfall sets him up for this like crazy ass character arc, and he doesn't. He doesn't have an arc at all. He learns nothing in the movie. It is nothing. Isn't an arc. That's the topic of the video. Characters who learn nothing, heroes, and he doesn't learn anything. And I think, you know, that old Bond theory of every 007's a new 007,
Right.
is a new Bond. It's a code name. I feel like that's actually the way you can save the franchise. Is if you start implementing that element.
And you stop doing for me, I would stop doing as much longevity with the different Bonds and switch them out more frequently so that you can get a different kind of story more often. Like, I feel like Bond could have a place now if they went a bit further away from Bourne and Mission Impossible. You don't try to do as much gritty, handheld world domination. I mean, like, world domination is always involved. But if you take it in the more elegant direction and in the more intellectual side of espionage... You know, I feel like then you could actually make something distinct out of it again.
I think you're completely right, and I think that's why, at the end of the day, the 60s Bond films and even some of the early 70s ones, they are still so beloved because I think that it still leaned into that kind of sexier side of it. I mean, we don't necessarily get a character out of it, but it's suave, it's sophisticated. Like, the fight scenes, they're great, but you like Bond because he's suave and he gets the girl and he gets to be a badass.
Well, it should be, oh shit, he's about to use a gun or a gadget, not when's he going to use a gun or a gadget? You know?
Yeah.
I feel like, especially the further we've gotten into the recent Bonds, you know, there is a lot of emphasis on that kind of stuff.
Well, and I think, again, that's probably why we all like Casino Royale so much, and we keep pointing to it, is that is the movie that is the best balance of everything, and we have never reached that again, which is why I think Bond 25 is seemingly keeps having all these stall-out problems, no one can figure it out.
Yeah, nobody knows where to go with
Yeah.
it.
Well, I feel like Daniel Craig wants to put a closing stamp on it and kind of bring it full circle from Casino Royale, and I feel like there's the artist struggle with that, and then there's probably the producer. This is my theory: is that there's the producer struggle of, well, we don't want to like end Bond, you know. We still want to end it in a way where we can keep this shit going, right? Even if you're not in it, right, Daniel?
We want
like
this to be the Simpsons of film franchises.
That's the issue that it lends itself to. Like what I'm getting with the Mission Impossible, the two sequels are going to do back to back, which I'm going to put out there. I'm actually very trepidatious about that.
Yeah.
Because what has made the Mission Impossible franchise so fascinating, because it took like Fast and Furious 5 movies to get it right.
Yeah, 100% it did.
Where Mission Impossible took 3.
Yeah.
Where it's like the first one's cool, second one's terrible, third one they got it, you know. And with what's always made them special is they do it. They put all their focus into one fucking movie. They release the movie. And then they get back to the drawing board and start again. When you're doing 2 back-to-back, I'm like, it's going to be a little excessive. And you even hear like the Russo brothers speaking out about, it never seems like a pleasant experience when they decide to do that back-to-back. And they seem to lose something almost especially lately.
Yeah.
The last one that did it well was freaking Lord of the Rings. But think of every other franchise that has done it. Like, we haven't seen Endgame yet, so we just don't know. But, you know, I think about the Matrix films,
Pirates of the Caribbean.
Pirates of the Caribbean, the Hobbit films, any of those young adult novel films, you know. Like, anytime you do those back-to-back, that tends to lessen something, and I feel like that's such a daunting task that I'm personally a little trepidatious about them doing two together.
Not just that, the series is not, and this is not a dig at Christopher McQuarrie, by the way. I love him as a director. I love him as a writer.
I love him as a man.
Well, that's fair.
I love him as a lover.
I love him as my confidant.
I will say, one thing that the Mission Impossible franchise had that was part of its DNA for so long was different directors coming in and leaving their own stamp as well.
Yes.
And we're going to be in a very different franchise by the time this is over with 8, where McQuarrie will have done 4 of the 8 movies. And that's like a very different side of this franchise at that point, which was a director-driven franchise to a writer-driven franchise. And I have to think he wants to do something, and I like to believe that he has a story that he wants to do for this, but I also know that he wrote most of the script for Fallout and Rogue Nation while they were still shooting. So what kind of franchise is he really aiming to do, and what does that say about it? And that's a very interesting kind of thing to be looking at. And that gives me those Pirates 3 kind of vibes, where it's like, we're making it up as we go. What's the worst that can happen? Pirates 3 can happen.
Yeah.
Well, and especially with a movie series like Mission Impossible, where all those details you got to keep in order, that sounds like a very daunting way to make a movie like that. And to face that back to back, it's like, as a consumer of media, I used to be excited by the prospect of getting more of something faster, and nowadays I am very wary of that, because more at an accelerated rate almost always means some kind of thing will be, missing from this or watered down out of this. Not that they can't get it, but I feel like Christopher Nolan had the right idea with his Batman movies, which is take your time and do something else to scrub your palate, because those movies are like Mission Impossible movies will consume your life for the time that you're making them.
They also might consume Tom Cruise's life by the time we're done with all
Yeah, like totally.
Well, you see, it's kind of weird because I wish the Mission Impossible franchise could go on without Tom Cruise, but I have the hardest time. And I feel like they're going to try.
Yeah.
They're not going to.
Oh, they're definitely.
They're going to give it a shot, but Tom Cruise is a rare breed. It's like trying to take a Jackie Chan franchise specifically and then not do it with Jackie Chan, who's known to do the stunts, you know?
Yep.
And Tom Cruise, you take that out of there,
you have to get Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah.
But not even Dwayne Johnson does his own stuff.
That's true.
Dwayne Johnson can have Jack Reacher. That's fine. But
the thing is, you can have Tom Cruise. You could have Tom Cruise at his age do the last Mission Impossible with the craziest stunt ever and be like, oh, you're afraid to do your own stunts, Mr. Wrestler guy? And then I'm sure he would rise to that challenge. I bet he wouldn't want to be
I feel
bested.
like he would.
Yeah.
I personally prefer the Ethan Hunt character overall as opposed to James Bond, because what you get from Casino, what are the 2 character-defining ones from the franchises? You get Casino Royale and you get Mission Impossible 3. And if you just look at those 2 movies, you see that Ethan Hunt is a very different spy as opposed to James Bond, where Ethan Hunt is a character who really cares. You know, like a lot of him is based off of love. That's like the major difference is like in that movie he wants to save Carrie Russell because that was his student and he he loved her, but not in like a I want to sleep with her, but like a father-daughter type of thing. And then the Michelle Monaghan side, I love them and everything about him. You even get like nuggets of it in Fallout where the female cop's gonna get killed and it's like, even though he has a much bigger mission at hand, he can't let this innocent person die. Whereas Bond is kind of like, I'm going to shoot everyone and everything and blow up whatever, and I'm going to sleep with whomever,
He's
like,
got that mission-based tunnel vision. Where
yeah.
you get the sense Ethan's doing this for kind of the good of the world, and Bond just has his particular job.
It's kind of weird, because I feel like Casino Royale, despite that being my favorite Bond movie, is part of what might actually kill the franchise.
Well, I think that's 100% accurate, because the one thing that they decided was that Bond as a character needed to be interesting. So everything that they did was tied back to his past, and that is destroyed what they were doing. Like, Spectre is a slog to get through, because you're like, wait, so Blofeld was just his stepbrother? Are you freaking kidding me? It made no sense.
It made no sense. And the thing is like the Bond archetypes is what allows it to have such longevity because of that lack. But then it's a weird thing when you introduce the emotional depth. You can't keep that going for a long time.
Right.
Because not even with the Mission franchise. Sorry, John. It's like, last thing I'll say is like, not even with the Mission franchise, Part 3 is the most personal one. But now, after that, it's like, they're still emotionally intense, but they're nowhere near as personal. And it has to be that way in order for the franchise to keep going.
Right.
And Bond just can't seem to find that because they went so fucking dark with Casino Royale that it's like you can't just go back to bright Bond after that,
See, I think Bond's fascinating because I don't know what the rules are anymore, because half of me has been sitting here during this talk going, well, just Halloween it. Just make a sequel and go, the other ones after Casino Royale didn't happen, and this one's a direct sequel to Casino Royale, and, we'll get it there. But I think the thing about Bond that I think... It's like, it was a cool idea to make him a developed, gritty, three-dimensional character, sure, but I think the strengths that we discovered because of that is the fact that it's okay, I think, that Bond is this cipher of a character, because the point, I guess, would be that the villains in the world domination and these side characters are what makes each movie interesting. Like the way a superhero franchise is kind of hard to maintain with the hero at the core being interesting every time, whereas the villains are always more interesting and stuff like that. And Bond has always been partly about, these eccentric villains with these eccentric schemes. And so I feel like with those nuts and bolts, you can totally still do Bond. It's just you have to... The biggest obstacle for me is just the stuff that is like dated in a bad way.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because we kind of joked about The Rock and the Fast and the Furious, but there's something to say about the fact that Fast and the Furious as a franchise has become more emotionally investing as a franchise and as characters than the Bond franchise ever has. And they're 8 movies in with a spin-off and a 9th movie on the way, and they're doing what Mission Impossible did. And they're growing on top of it.
I think Fate of the Furious took a dip with audiences because they tried getting the gravitas back.
Yeah,
when I'm like,
it's
not the way you keep franchises. It's weird. It's like, as much as for me, I'm all about depth. But for certain franchises, sometimes when you try to infuse that as your main thing and keep that going, it actually slows down the enthusiasm of the franchise.
Totally.
Like, because the thing with those Fast and Furious movies prior to 5 were, man, they were like melodramatic, boring. I thought they were boring and melodramatic, like especially the 4th one. Like, Jesus,
the 4th one.
They think this shit is so heavy, don't they? And then part 5, they're like, no, let's just have fun. And then they kept that fun going. And then Fate of the Furious was like, oh man, Vin Diesel's really trying to win an Oscar for some reason. And then Hobbs and Shaw, you're like, yeah, that's more my cup of tea right there.
But that's what I mean is the fun of it. And that's, I think,
and Bond needs to try to find a way to get there again.
Because Mission Impossible has maintained that fun feeling too.
Exactly.
Like, that's what we need out of these franchises. We don't need it to always be this grueling character arc. And I kind of, unfortunately, a lot of this falls on Nolan, and I don't blame Nolan as a filmmaker, but Batman Begins forced
bad lessons we learned from
yeah. Like, every studio was like, we have to make the next Batman Begins. We have to make the next Dark Knight. So hence Casino Royale and Skyfall both being those movies. And I would much rather have Bond where it's kind of fun again. Like, Casino Royale is dark, but it's fun. And that's where Craig has peaked.
Well, and you can temper it too, because like they keep making these movies, so you can have a fun one here and a dark one there, and you know, you can, again, I feel like it would be a good idea to change actors more frequently, because then you can cover up the lack of interesting Bond character notes with just what each person brings to the role.
Yeah. And I think the Bond franchise was slightly confusing at first when you watch Casino and then Skyfall, because it's one of those weird prequel movies, but it's modern day time.
Yeah.
Yet Judi Dench was still there. Like, it's kind of strange in that, like, because when they try to introduce, to me, one of the more interesting origin was actually what they did with Ray Fiennes' M, which they didn't follow through with well in Spectre. But when you see that, if you know Dr. No, and then you see M in like him evolve into becoming M in Skyfall, you're like, oh, that shit's fucking cool. They did that. Yeah, that was sweet. But they don't really follow through with it with any impact. And I think through talking this through, it's like that's what Mission Impossible has done so well. They had a really heavy film with Part 3, but they managed to figure out the right tone. Because what they did with Part 3 was heavy, and then Part 4 was the most fun you've ever had in your life. and then 5. and then 5 was like, no, we're gonna mishmash. I think Fallout and Rogue Nation both did a good job at taking tones of 3 and 4 and putting them together in one blend. Because it feels personally intense, but also a lot of fun.
Well, and it teaches you, too, that a lot of things there are different ways to give weight and intensity to your action espionage movie, other than, like, Mission Impossible 3 does do a very personal, character-driven Ethan Hunt story. But you don't have to do that to have that level of stakes and intensity.
Of emotional intensity, yeah.
Yeah, there are other things, there are other themes you can touch on, there are other contexts and situations. It doesn't just have to be this character is personally having a very fucked up experience.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting, too, when you think about Casino Royale to Quantum, like, it's very much a through-line story, like, because Quantum picks up right where it left off. Fallout picks up not long after Rogue Nation and does the same thing, but one of these movies is much more successful at making us care because it still has that emotional weight to it while still being really fulfilling.
But it's
and
not
fun.
like it's not like filled with like insane amounts of emotional weight. It's like you need just enough. That's all we need.
Well, it was the Michelle Monaghan stuff, which is why it's such a great kind of cap to 3, and it's all started there.
Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, overall, I feel like it's weird. I prefer the Mission Impossible franchise. I don't think it can continue on without Tom Cruise, even though they're going to try. And I think Bond is, to close out my thoughts, I feel like you would need to kind of really change up who Bond is, especially nowadays, because alcoholic, womanizing son of a bitch just wouldn't work well today. and it's old and it's done, and it's like... because the way the women are, especially in the older films, were written, were very much like, oh, I just always fall for Bond, you know. And I've seen plenty of articles that like write up how like he practically assaults this girl right here, you know. So a lot of that, and I felt that way with Spectre. And I'm like, you're really taking advantage of a grieving woman right there, man. So I think you need to change it up, and it needs to bring back the fun.
Maybe what it needs to do is do a movie that's actually like a period piece. Maybe it would be better to put Bond back in like the 50s or the 60s. Yeah. And like rebuild it from there.
I feel like if you treat him like a graphic novel or a comic book, like a character, that's how you do Bond.
Yeah. I mean, that's why it works. The best Bond stories right now actually are being told in the comics right now, so you guys should check those out. Yeah. But legitimately, it almost might be better to move backwards and start fresh there, because a lot of what you're talking about might be... It's still not acceptable, obviously, but in the time period it might be able to swallow it a little bit better.
Yeah. If you could mix a dash of what Mad Men has in its periodness, where it's like, we're going to show you how people behaved, but you understand that, oh, things were different.
That's why I think if you take the ways that all these Bond people are the same, but you just make the 00 an identity, I feel like that's the saving grace to it.
I like that idea a lot,
I actually think that might not be the worst way to end Craig's run. At this
pass
point.
The mantle, right?
Yeah, because...
To Jeremy Renner.
Well, I mean, and don't
finally, the third time's a chain.
Keep trying to get you a franchise, man. One of these has got to fail.
Yeah, but looking back at it, it's kind of funny because on Her Majesty's Secret Service, which a lot of people know is the one-off, like the one-hit wonder Bond with George Lazenby, they make a joke in that movie about, well, this never happened to the other guy. So they kind of have always had an ongoing joke about that idea of maybe it is, maybe it's not. Yeah. So why not? I mean, at this point, it might not be the worst idea to at least take the gamble.
Bring back Sean Bean 006 spin-off series.
Let's do this.
I would watch
Yep.
that. That was beautiful.
What, the podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was nice, right? We started off a little rough, kind of like a franchise. Then we eventually found our groove about 2/3 of the way in. Yeah. All right,
Hey,
guys.
man, I thought it was great.
I had a great time. That was fun, man.
Well, you're a podcaster, so coming from you,
Yeah.
that means a lot.
All right, guys. Well, you should follow PJ Campbell on the PJ Campbell Show. Go check out my episode I did with him and Patrick Hogue. Who do you guys prefer, Bond or Mission Impossible? If you saw my movie fights, I believe the audience voted for me. I won that round.
That's the correct answer.
That's the correct
It is
answer.
correct.
There's, opinions are objective.
At least this one.
This one, specifically.
Specifically.
And anything I think. Subscribe to the Reject Nation. Click that notification bell. Check us out on Patreon. And Mikhail Linden, my man, thank you so much for requesting this, buddy. This video is dedicated to you, my friend. He's a handsome Swedish guy. Look at him. Look at him. Look at that guy. Isn't he handsome?
Aw,
He
dude.
is. He
Dude.
should be in a Mission Impossible movie.
He's sure right. He could be a villain.
Dude, or a Bond movie.
Or he could be like a Q.
Yeah, there we go.
Dude,
Mikhail.
petition, you're the new Q. Let's do it.
You're the new Q.
Tweet at us. We will start this rolling in. We will make this happen.
I thought this guy was like 28 years old. I found out I can't find it. He's 65 years old, if I'm not mistaken. 40.
40.
Dude, I thought
He's
he
the
was
perfect age to fight Ethan Hunt.
Yeah.
Dude, now's the time. Get in there. Just meet him up on the Space Needle or wherever he's going to jump off next.
See you guys.